Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself too?
Sure. My name's Joanna Blake. I'm a sculptor here in Brentwood, Maryland. And I've been sculpting for about 10 years, and this is the most recent project.
Which is quite impressive.
Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about the project?
Yeah, so this is the sculpture to commemorate the Battle of Bladensburg for the War of 1812, which we're about to have the 200th anniversary of, coming up pretty soon. And I was approached by the Amen Trust to create a memorial, and this is it.
Could you talk a little bit about the process you went through to get to here?
Sure.
I mean, this is, you see it in its whole now, but I can't imagine it just popped out this way. So.
No, there were quite a few versions of it. Originally, it started off with drawings. I did several different sketches. This is one of the original watercolor sketches right here. And originally, when the Trust approached me about the project, it was that, the Battle of Bladensburg is a huge event in American history, and there's really nothing in this area that commemorates that acknowledges that something important happened here.
Which is funny because, yeah, it is Bladensburg, you were saying.
Right. So, and in Bladensburg, we have the Peace Cross, which is a memorial to World War I. And there's a Korean memorial in Vietnam and 9/11 and World War II, but nothing to commemorate Bladensburg. So it's been about 200 years, and it's time for something to be there. So in researching it, well, it's not good. So the challenge was for me as an artist is how do you commemorate a defeat? And I went with John Giannetti of the Amen Trust to Baltimore, and we looked at some of the 1812 stuff there, some of which were started in 1814, as early as 1814 or 1815. And everything there just has a different feel to it because, things turned out differently in Baltimore. So everything is really triumphant. There's like this, gilded figure on top of the Francis Scott Key Memorial, and everything's tall and kind of triumphant. And I really wanted to convey with the architecture that this was a defeat. And originally the memorial was called Undaunted in Defeat. Nobody liked that. So now it's called Undaunted in Battle, which will be the inscription across the bottom. But in researching it, it was there were about 5,000 U.S. militia that were untrained that arrived at the scene late because everybody thought that the main target would be Baltimore, so it left the U.S. Capitol sort of undefended. And when they found out that the British were going to attack through Bladensburg, one of the main routes to the capital, everybody met up there, and we're just sort of disorganized. And when the British started firing Congreve rockets, they ran. But Barney was just arriving on the scene with 500 Marines and his flotilla men, and they stayed and they fought the British and put up a good fight. So rather than showing militiamen in retreat, I thought that Joshua Barney, the hero of the battle, should be the main figure of it. And then, when I learned that he also had Marines with him and his flotilla men, it seemed like it would be much more interesting, instead of doing a three-dimensional sculpture in the round, to do some kind of relief sculpture that could, represent one of each of the groups represented there.
Oh, that's amazing. It's kind of almost humbling to think of commemorating a defeat. I heard about the battle and about how it had led to the eventual victory at Baltimore because of the failings. Right. You could almost say because of the failings of this battle, it led to the victory at Baltimore, and it's humbling and to remember something like this and how even in defeat we could rise up.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, just because it was a defeat doesn't mean that it doesn't deserve the recognition. I mean, the Alamo was a defeat,
Yeah.
And in the same way, we were caught off guard in Pearl Harbor. But it galvanized the nation, and we were able to defeat the British in Baltimore.
Yeah,
So.
and I mean, people still fought and died to protect us and protect the country.
Yeah. And so it's it's for those people who stayed and fought and risked their lives for their country. And the history of Barney and his flotilla is just amazing. So.
Now, you have the drawing.
Yeah.
Where did you go from there?
Okay, so from that drawing, I presented it to the trust, and then I also had a couple of historians look at it, who told me right away, well, they would have all been wearing hats. Barney, it doesn't matter that it was August 24th and hot as hell, like he would have, he would not have unbuttoned his coat. So that everybody, they needed to be, dressed in their uniforms in a very specific way. So that I actually found out that there were 1812 reenactors, and so I was able to meet some of them at Fort McHenry, the living history guys, and asked them if they would be willing to model for me, which they did. And
That's
so,
fortunate.
yeah, it was pretty awesome. So I came up with this drawing that I should have made another copy of it. I don't have any. I put some notes on it, and then presented that to the trust. One of the reasons was that, originally I had him posed this in this direction because I wanted the sword to be against the background, just because of the bronze casting process, to not have it out in space and to be a risk of vandalism and things like being vandalized. But a lot of, when the reenactors came to the studio, they were saying, we tried some different things, but then ultimately I found out that Barney was wounded in the right thigh, and we wanted to show that. And then the other thing is, it sort of makes more sense on the site if the figures are facing in the direction that the British would have been approaching from.
Yeah.
So that was, that was two important things, which sort of made me flip the composition. And then we tried several different poses, and these guys were gracious enough to come back to the studio in all of these uniforms with all of this equipment and try several different things.
It's super hot then too.
Actually, it was in the wintertime, so they were, having all these wool uniforms on, they were well dressed.
They got the relief that these guys didn't.
yeah, you didn't get a sense of how they were sweating. We tried some different poses, and then ultimately sort of came back to this one, which is pretty similar to the original idea. And then for the background of it, I mentioned that things in Baltimore were too triumphant, and I was really looking for something a little more somber. And then I also wanted it to speak to the architecture of the time period, so I was looking at Federalist style architecture. And so the design is actually based on Latrobe's mausoleums. Who's one of the architects of the U.S. Capitol, and just something a little more funereal and somber than some tall triumphant arch or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it's almost, I don't know if it's necessarily wider than it is taller, but it looks like it from here. It's quite big, so it's hard to get that sense. But it does feel it's a massive, it feels big in scale, but it doesn't feel tall and very, like, as you said, triumphant. It feels somber. And
so, the other idea that sort of alludes to defeat was, it's not that, obviously things have not gone well. He's wounded, he's down, but they're still undaunted. So he's still sort of urging his men forward, even as they're helping him up. So that was the idea behind that.
Yeah, it's amazing the emotion that a statue can hold.
Thanks.
And it's the details, as you said, he's being pulled up, and it's mid standing, and yeah, quite amazing.
Thanks. So once this design was approved, then I made a inch to the foot maquette.
Okay.
So the scale of this gives you a sense of the size of a man. And this just sort of allowed me to start thinking about how this will work in relief. And I came up with the idea of having this curved footing so that the figures could sort of step out from the background, that the relief could get higher as it came toward the center. So there's a slight curve in the design. And actually originally this maquette was more like that. Well, it was that design right there that I photoshopped in with that was based on the original drawings with the anthemion on the corner and the pyramid roof and the columns, like very Federalist style. But then it kind of got stripped down for the budget, but hopefully those elements are going to come back.
It'll be restored to its original.
Yeah, hopefully. So I had the models come back to the studio again, and this is Myron Peterson of Ship's Company, who posed for Commodore Joshua Barney, and this is Robert Stewart. I met him at Defender State at Fort McHenry. He worked for the Park Service and was part of their living history. And then this is Gunny Sergeant Thomas Williams, who actually works for the Marines and
wow.
is part of their. He works for the museum at Quantico. So these guys came in full uniform with all of their equipment and posed for me, and this is the pose. And I took hundreds of photographs of it, and then created this quarter scale model.
Oh wow!
Was the next step.
How Charles Ball got in there?
Sure. I guess I could speak to that. I found out about Charles Ball from looking at the Star Spangled website. In some of the research, because he wrote an account of his life. He was a former slave who served on Barney's flotilla, who was a cook. But then when the fighting started in Bladensburg, he was manning a cannon right there alongside Barney. And that was another thing, was to have the cannon in the background.
Oh yeah, because he has the
sponge and
the
rammer.
Sponge. Yeah, I couldn't think of the word for it.
Right. But a lot of Barney's men were armed with cutlasses and pikes, but Charles Ball was arming a cannon. So.
Oh wow.
So there's the quarter scale model, and then once that was approved, I had it taken to the Foundry, and it was scanned and digitally enlarged in foam. Just the figures, because. Actually, at this scale, I was using a cannon that they were using in a reenactment in Baltimore, which I found out the cannon was too small here. And a few of these 18-pound cannons still exist, but there are no field carriages, so historians can only guess at what the field carriages might have looked like. But they gave me some pretty good examples to go by. So. But one of the ones I was using was actually from the Alamo. It was a little later, and they thought that they were probably wagon wheels and not meant for cannons. So at the quarter scale, when the historians came back and looked at it, they were like, well, it was too small there, and now it's too big here. The field carriage is too big, and the cannon is too short. So rather than having the whole thing enlarged, I just had the figures enlarged in foam and reworked the cannon by hand.
So you really worked hand in hand with historians to get everything, all the little details, just right.
Yeah, to try and get the details right.
That's amazing.
And it was so helpful to have, the models in the accurate clothing from the period. Yeah, so it's actually fairly light. There's maybe 200 pounds of clay on there, and that's it.
This foam, and then clay is on top of the foam.
Yeah, the foam is a type of armature underneath it. Yeah. That had, the volumes were there. The shape was there, but the details had to be added back in. But versus as opposed to pointing it up yourself.
Yeah.
It's an amazing technology.
It's an interesting time for all that.
Could have gone from their waist. I've enlarged pieces before. My hand with using foam and slicing the piece up and then transferring that onto the foam. But this is so much more accurate and faster.
And faster.
Yeah.
It takes a lot less time. So how long did it, from basically like the start of designing this to this point, how long was that?
I think John approached me maybe in November or December of 2009.
Wow.
And then we went back and forth about the design, and there was some initial, fundraising and stuff to kind of get the project off the ground. But I guess the work didn't really start in earnest until the beginning of last year. And then once the quarter scale was approved, then I got a contract to do the large one, and I think it was an 8-month contract. So to go from this size to this size was, once you figure out the design, then sculpting it is the easy part, really. You know, it's it's at least the more straightforward.
The more straightforward part.
Yeah.
Now, what's the journey from here of this statue?
Well, soon they're going to come in. The Foundry is going to come and pick the piece up. Actually, use this chain hoist and there's a break in the railing to turn it sideways and take it over the railing, and they're going to back a truck down the alley and load it up, and it will go to the Foundry, and it'll be cast in bronze.
Okay, and then do you know about how long that's going to take?
And that process takes about 4 to 6 months.
Okay, so and once this leaves, is that it for you? Is there more you're doing on this?
Well, I will sort of shepherd it through the process at the Foundry. They'll make a rubber mold on it, and then they'll pour waxes into it, and I'll need to inspect the wax to make sure that all of the details are there and that everything came out correctly. And then they'll make ceramic shells on that, and then once they pour the bronze, there'll be a metal inspection to do. And it's cast in pieces, so it will be reassembled, and the joints will be welded, and then they'll chase the welds so that you can't see them, sandblast it, and then put a patina on it, and there'll be a patina inspection. And it'll probably be, it'll look similar to this, which is just a faux patina that I did with some bronze powder and shellac and oil-based paint and some wax, but bronze is like 95% copper,
right?
And so when it's left out in the elements, it gets that kind of old penny look to it, which they can accelerate with chemicals.
Okay.
So we want it to look like it's always been there.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so now you were talking about how the War of 1812, how there hasn't been any. It's been almost 200 years. There hasn't been anything commemorating the battles of Bladensburg. Do you think the War of 1812 is underrepresented in our culture, in our history, like books and I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something. It's not prominent in my mind. I've been out of school for a long time, but I've lived in Bladensburg for almost 10 years, and didn't really remember the significance of the Battle of Bladensburg or what happened. But 1812 was really the second battle for American independence, and so I think the importance of it is lost on a lot of people.
Yeah, I was actually, when I was first talking about doing this episode, I was trying to remember back, and I think it was just like a small section in my textbook stuck between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, but there wasn't really anything until more recently with the bicentennial coming up that I started hearing more about it.
Right.
And
the bicentennial.
Battle of New Orleans.
Yeah. Well, and the bicentennial was really the impetus behind doing something. It was.
That's where the Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
Right.
War of 1812.
And it's amazing that they don't really talk. Well, they talk about the Star Spangled Banner, but they don't actually talk that much about the war.
No.
Now, what do you see as art's role in historic preservation? Because obviously this is art, and you're preserving history.
Yeah. So I guess the challenge is just in storytelling, in making the art compelling so that people want to look at it, and then trying to just show visually, give people a sense of what happened.
Oh, I have to say, like, I've read books, and there's like the historic fiction, which brings emotion into it, but then there's the sterile, like the textbooks. But I know, like, looking at this, you can really feel, it's almost heartbreaking when you see this. You see him struggling, and that's, I think, one of the things personally, like with art, that there's that connection that people can make that I don't think that you can always make with just text on a wall at like a museum.
Yeah, so the idea was to really have, just the artwork on the front for the reasons that you said, to have a kind of a visceral, emotional response to the piece. And then the back side of the memorial is going to be a historical marker that will have information about the battle, some historical maps. And so hopefully, as you're driving by in your car, you might be compelled to stop and get out and examine this further, and then, you'll have an opportunity to read the back of it. That's the more didactic part of it. That's where the
You draw people in and give them the information.
yes, yeah.
Do you have any, you were saying you were going to basically be, as you said, shepherding this through the next process, but do you have any other memorials, anything like that, any art preserving history up on the horizon that you're going to be working on?
Yeah, I just finished a piece for the city of Alexandria for the Contrabands and Freedmen Cemetery Memorial. Do you know about that?
No, I
project?
don't know anything about
You
that.
should know about that.
I probably
it's,
should.
I didn't know about it. It's really fascinating. I mean, we don't have to talk about it now, but at the onset of the Civil War, Alexandria was under Union occupation. And so if you were a slave and you could make it as far as Alexandria, then you would be under the protection of the Union Army. And so lots of people fled from the South towards Alexandria, and it became overrun. And then there were the problems that you have with like refugee situations where there was crowding and disease, and a lot of people died. And it was under the War Department at the time, and so they kept a list of everyone who died during that time, and they were all buried in one area in Alexandria. And then in the 1940s, some jackass built a gas station on top of it.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And then in the 1970s, someone built an office building on top of it. And it's right there by the Woodrow Wilson Bridge Exchange. And so it's taken a long time because not only is it an archaeological site, it's a cemetery. And when they dug the holes for the tanks, there were lots of graves that were disturbed, and so they're able to do some kind of imaging of the ground, like the way that the soil has moved, so they know the exact locations of individual grave sites.
Okay.
And they don't know where each individual is buried specifically, but they can tell by the size of the grave whether it was a child or an adult.
Oh.
And because of smallpox, of the 1,800 people that are buried there, more than half of them are children under the age of 10. So it's almost 1,000 kids under the age of 10 who are buried there without there's not really any recognition of it. And so the city is finally turning the site into a memorial that's sort of fitting to
I'll have to go out and see it.
yeah, and it's called the Contrabands and Freedmen Cemetery Memorial. And it seems weird to think of people as contraband. I guess if you steal yourself.
It's something I'm going to look into, and it's interesting when you start to really delve into it, the history that isn't told
Right.
versus the history that is told.
Right, and that's sort of what this project was about.